Good afternoon, everyone. As you've been going through your sessions today, hope you've had an opportunity to take a look around the virtual room or the physical one if you're watching with a group, and just take in the faces, the names, the pronouns beside the screen. As you look around, as you see the faces and the names are in the rooms, I want you to just recognize that that's community. Before anything else, I want to say thank you. Thank you for being here, for showing up for yourselves, for your students, and for each other. This is the Teaching While Queer Educators Conference. It's our space for our people, for our allies, and for our power. And I just want to say what a morning it's been, right? The sessions so far have been incredible, from conversations on inclusive literature to the workshop on allyship and action. It's been pure brilliance. Every speaker, every question, every bit of dialogue this morning reminds me why we do this, why we carve out time from our already full schedules, why we spend our weekends talking about lesson plans, legislation, and liberation. It's because this isn't just a profession, it's a movement. So, whether you're joining us from a classroom, your couch, or a quiet corner between grading papers, thank you for taking on this movement and making this movement real and possible. Thank you also to the board of directors for Teaching While Queer for volunteering your time today, working behind the scenes, and helping to ensure that this safe space for queer educators and allies is possible. Before we go anywhere, a grounding from bell hooks. Bell hooks reminds us that education is the practice of freedom and that classrooms remain the most radical space of possibility in the academia, in the academy. Those aren't just quotable lines, they're instructions. If education is freedom practice, then we design each class meeting as a small rehearsal of liberation. Structure plus improvisation, rigor plus joy, consent plus risk. I want to tell you why Teaching While Queer exists at all, and why I'm standing here today with a room full of people. When I introduced Teaching While Queer for the very first time, I said it out loud like a promise. This podcast is for LGBTQIA plus teachers, administrators, and anyone working in academia who deserve to be seen and heard. It did not start as a nonprofit or a conference. Those weren't even ideas in my head. It started as a microphone and a need. When I introduced the podcast, my pronouns were he, they. As I've grown through my understanding of myself and through the community that I've had developed, I understand myself to be they, them now. Even that shift is part of the story of this movement because naming ourselves is part of surviving. The roots of this go back to my freshman year of high school. I was 13 years old. I have a September birthday, and I always started school 3 days after my birthday. I was 13 years old and in marching band. We had summer practice, and I started a quiet relationship with someone in my section. His mom found out, called my parents, called the school, and outed us both. I walked into the first day of high school carrying a label that I did not yet have words for. I knew I liked boys. I did not yet know what gay meant. I did not get to come out on my own terms. Here's what saved me: my band director. She pulled me aside into her office that day and asked a simple question: "How are you?" That one act told me I was not alone. Years later, she barely remembered the conversation. For me, it changed everything. So, Dr. Diana Hollinger, thank you. You gave me enough safety to figure out myself, to date who I needed to date, to stumble toward the word queer, and to stop apologizing for existing. Life kept moving, graduated high school, started my adventures of college, I like to say I gave college the college try because it took me a few tries to finish. I met my husband in 2008. We married in 2009 without legal recognition because Prop 8 passed in California, codifying marriage between a man and a woman. Later in 2013, we became one of the first couples to be legally married in San Diego County. On the same exact day, in Orange County, we finalized the adoption of our older three children. Everyone took the same last name. It is a family holiday for us. A year later, our fourth child came into our life. Now we span the ages from elementary school to adulthood. Being a parent was my line in the sand. When I took a teaching job in Texas, I told my administrator there is no closet for me. My children will not be asked to lie about their family so that I can play it safe. Over the years, I've sponsored LGBTQIA plus student organizations because I did not have that space that I needed when I was a child. I've taught students who disagree with me and my existence, and we get the work done with care and clarity. I have taught students who are figuring out language for themselves, and I try to be the adult who makes the room safe for discovery. My own shift to they them happened only recently, and I owe that in part to a generation of young people who are braver and freer with language than I was allowed to be. A few years ago, I was named Teacher of the Year in my district in Texas. That spotlight was beautiful and heavy. Standing in front of the entire district, I told the story I just told you, the outing, the band office, the one adult who checked in on me. I said what I still believe now, that every single person in a school can be that adult. You do not need to agree with me to keep a student safe. You only need to decide that dignity is not negotiable. At the end of the day, statistically, students truly believe their teachers don't care about them. And all we need to do is show up and be that person who provides that moment of care. And it can be just one conversation. Then came the start of the hardest years any of us had. Attacks on teachers, attacks on trans students, book bans, surveillance. That is when I realized I needed something new. A space where LGBTQ plus educators could tell the truth about our classrooms and our lives. A space to resist isolation, a space to be witnessed. After dealing with some anti queer behavior in my district as a teacher of the year because of that spotlight, I gave myself 1 year to search for queer spaces for queer educators where I felt like I could share my story and gain some insight from my peers about their own experiences. After that year, I couldn't find much. I found very localized spaces, for instance, one that I'm currently a part of because I've moved from Texas to New York City, like Proud Educators, which was a group of local New York City educators. But I was in San Antonio, Texas. So in 2022, I opened a calendar, set a wild goal to record dozens of conversations, and hit publish on an invitation. If you are an LGBTQ plus educator, come share your story. People wrote back from across the country and around the world. In fact, my first episode featured an educator from France. The podcast became a map, a way to find each other, a way to practice belonging in public. Teaching While Queer is not just a show, it is a safety plan built from stories. It is everything that Band Office taught me, scaled across time and distance. It says to the lonely first year teacher in a hostile district, you are not the only one. It says to the seasoned educator who is tired, your work has lineage and you get to rest inside it. It says to all of us, our lives are curriculum and our community is the lesson. Audre Lorde gives us the rule of life we can pin above the desk. Your silence will not protect you. And I think that is so powerful, especially now. Our stories are not indulgences, they are infrastructure. They teach us how to resist isolation and how to build practical safety. So that's the backstory. Now here's the through line. We do not survive by shrinking. We survive by speaking, by connecting, and by organizing. We teach, we fight, and we stay, not as martyrs, but as neighbors. With the ground under our feet, let's talk about the world we are teaching in right now and what collective safety can look like today. Let's be honest, we are gathering in a time that's not easy. Every day there's a new story. A teacher fired for displaying a pride flag, a district banning books that mention gender identity or same sex families, legislation that threatens our right to exist in schools, in libraries, in sports, in public. And if you're sitting there thinking this feels like a coordinated attack, you're not wrong. It is, and it has been for my entire life, if not longer. There are organized movements, well funded and deliberate, working to erase queer and trans visibility from education and from public. They moved from don't say gay to don't be gay, from censoring curriculum to criminalizing identity. And through all of that, they've tried to convince us that we are alone. But that's the thing. They underestimate us. They underestimate teachers because teachers are organizers. We know how to build community with very few resources and very little time. We know how to create something from nothing, to make beauty in scarcity, to build belonging even when the system doesn't want it to exist. And we've been doing it for decades. So when I say we teach, we fight, we stay, that's not just a slogan, that's a lineage, that's our ancestry. Because this isn't the first time queer educators have been targeted. We have a history, and if we learn from it, we can also learn how to survive what's happening now. Let's go back to the 1950s during the Lavender Scare. Thousands of queer teachers, librarians, and public servants were fired under the suspicion of being security risks. The government claimed our queerness made us dangerous, that we couldn't be trusted near children, that our mere existence was a threat. Sound familiar? The rhetoric hasn't changed much. It's just gotten slicker. But here's what's important. Even then, people resisted. They built underground networks. They wrote letters of support. They found one another in hidden meeting spots, in bookstores, in coded ads in newspapers. They whispered survival strategies. And from those whispers came the early gay rights movement. Even before Stonewall, we fought. Then Stonewall happened on June 28th, 1969. Patrons, neighbors, and street youth fought back against a police raid at the Stonewall Inn, sparking days of uprising in Greenwich Village and catalyzing a national movement. Post Stonewall groups like the Gay Activist Alliance honed inside the system tactics, while feminists such as the Lavender Menace demanded lesbian inclusion in the women's movement. Meanwhile, youth formed early GSAs, linking school life to civil rights struggle. Flash forward to the 1980s and 90s, and the world was in crisis again. The AIDS epidemic was devastating our community while the government deliberately looked away. And out of that devastation came ACT UP. Queer and trans people, artists, teachers, students organizing, protesting, demanding to be seen. Their slogan was silence equals death, and they meant it. And again, it's true today. They refused to die quietly. They refused to be invisible. They taught that the world that resists that they taught the world that resistance isn't just shouting, it's strategy. It's organization, it's art, it's joy in the face of grief. And if we go back even further, We see indigenous communities teaching in secret, preserving languages outlawed by colonial governments. We see Two Spirit educators teaching culture as resistance. These are not museum pieces, they are living toolkits. Decentralize leadership, pair joy with discipline, make your own media, and never let opposition set the only agenda. James Baldwin said in 1963, the paradox of education is precisely this, that as one begins to become conscious, one begins to examine the society in which he is being educated. That's our charge, to help students encounter the world honestly enough to change it. That's also our weapon, and it's also why we are feared. All of these movements, the Lavender Scare survivors, ACT UP activists, Indigenous resistors, they remind us that education has always been an act of defiance. So, what do we do with that history? We learn that when systems try to isolate us, connection becomes our armor. We learn that when laws threaten our work, our creativity becomes our weapon. And we learn that collective safety isn't about hiding, it's about showing up together. Because safety doesn't come from silence, it comes from solidarity. Think about the teachers who refused to remove their pride flags this past year, the librarians who quietly banned books available through coded systems, the principals who used their school newsletters to affirm trans students even when it wasn't policy approved. There are resistance happening. That's not compliance, that's courage. That's the spirit of we teach, we fight, we stay. Take a breath with me. Just one deep breath. Now think of one person, one queer or trans educator, one ally, one student who makes you feel braver. Hold their name in your mind. That's what we're fighting for. That connection, that possibility, that shared belief that education can still be a place of liberation even now. So, what does collective safety actually look like in 2025? Because this can't just be theory, it has to be practice. First, it looks like building networks in your school, in your community, in our nation, around the world. Find the one or two people you can trust and start there. If you have a supportive admin, great, loop them in. If not, build horizontally. Find your peers, your local union, the counselor, the custodian, the parents of queer children, the paraprofessional who sees what's really happening. Then create an informal safety plan. If one of us is targeted, who documents? Who speaks up? Who calls the press or the union? Who checks in afterwards to make sure we're okay? Next, we have to practice digital safety. Know what's online about you. Just the other day, my middle schoolers came up to say that they Googled my name, and I said, great, what did you find? And then they said I was famous, and that was it. Kudos to me for being famous. But you do have to protect your accounts. Don't engage with trolls who only want your energy. They're not there to listen to you, they're just there to rile you up. And teach your students how to do the same. Digital literacy is queer survival now. And finally, use collective visibility as protection. Host a visibility week, organize a teach in, support your GSA, or form one if you can. Visibility, when shared, becomes safety. But let me also say this, and I've been a huge proponent on this portion. Resistance takes energy. And this year, I've heard so many of us, it's October, I've heard so many of us, especially queer and trans teachers, say they're tired of being the only one speaking up, tired of being asked to educate their colleagues, tired of doing emotional labor just to exist. If that's you, hear me. You don't have to be the loudest voice to make an impact. You don't have to do everything on your own. Sometimes the most radical act is just staying and being present, staying in the classroom, staying visible, staying authentic. You're allowed to rest. You're allowed to log off. You're allowed to protect your peace because resistance isn't sustainable without restoration. ACT UP organizers used to say, we take care of each other. That's our charge too. We can't build a movement of liberation if we replicate systems of burnout. We need tenderness as much as strategy. When I started teaching while queer, I thought I was creating a podcast. But what it really became was a mirror, a way to see us. Over the years, I've heard stories from queer teachers in rural Texas, trans professors in small liberal arts colleges, non binary student teachers navigating certification systems that don't even recognize their pronouns. And every time I'm reminded, we're everywhere. That's terrifying to those who want to control education. Because when queer educators connect, we're unstoppable. We share lesson plans, yes, but we also share survival strategies. We build solidarity that crosses subjects, grades, and state lines. We create a pedagogy rooted in care, visibility, and joy. Those things are pretty threatening right now. So when people ask me, Brian, aren't you afraid? Or as my mom says sometimes, gosh, I wish you would just shut up because she's afraid. I tell them the truth. Yes, sometimes I am, but I'm also more hopeful than ever because every single person in this room on this conference is living proof that fear doesn't get the final say. Our predecessors, those fired during the Lavender Scare, those who fought during the AIDS crisis, those who taught language and culture in defiance of colonial rule, they didn't just survive, they laid the groundwork for what we're doing now. They fought so we could teach, and now it's our turn to teach so others can fight. The arc continues. The classroom remains one of the few places where young people can still imagine something different, and we are the ones holding that space. That's sacred work. So when they tell us not to say gay, we'll sing it in harmony. When they tell us not to teach queer history, we'll turn it into a lesson about resilience. When they tell us to stay silent, we'll remember that silence has never saved us. We teach because knowledge is power they cannot take. We fight because our students are watching and they deserve courage. And we stay because staying is how we win. So before we wrap, I want to ask something. After this conference, when the breakout rooms close, when the chat quiets, when you go back to your own school, don't leave this energy behind. Exchange emails, follow each other on social media, start a text thread, share your wins and your worries. This is your network. This is your community. This is your collective safety. And remember, the goal isn't just to survive another year, it's to build something that lasts, something that outlives fear, something that makes the next generation of queer educators feel like they belong from the start. Because the truth is, we are the ancestors of tomorrow's teachers. And they'll look back at this moment, this conference, this community, and say, they stayed so that we could begin. So, to every single one of you here, thank you. Thank you for teaching while queer. Thank you for fighting for what's right. Thank you for staying. The past shows us what's possible. The present demands our courage. And the future, it's already being built by everyone in this room. We teach, we fight, we stay. Thank you.